Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Be sure to join our network and get involved in the work that we are doing. If you can, please like and subscribe. It helps us build this channel, which serves as a platform to communicate with our members. This video is part of our 2025 annual conference. We're looking for folks to be on the conference planning committee. Please email info@housingoregon.org.
We made it. We're humming. Really happy to be here with everybody today. We're going to present on cottage clusters in Clackamas County. I'm Andrew Crampton. I'm a housing developer with the Housing Authority of Clackamas County. I'll start just with a quick overview of our presentation, go through a few of the themes that we want to really convey today. At the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions, so I'll put on my walking shoes and go around, and if you want to raise your hand, I'll bring the mic to ask questions. So please try and hold questions till the end, so that way the questions can be captured on the recording. So I'll start with the presentation on really just kind of the definitions for purposes of discussion of today. You'll see kind of in the industry a wide variety of descriptions or definitions of what middle housing is, what cottage cluster housing is. So we'll start with kind of a basic overview of how this presentation is defining those terms for purposes of the framework. And then after that, we'll have Jesse talk about the Shortstack project in Milwaukie. And then Gloria will discuss the Housing Authority of Clackamas County's redevelopment of the Clackamas Heights public housing property, discuss why HAC chose to use the cottage cluster model for its redevelopment, and really kind of some of the process and framework for making that decision, how the resident engagement really kind of helped facilitate both the type of housing, but also kind of the implementation of the cottage cluster housing. Brian with Bohr Architects is then going to go into really the site planning, site analysis of the property, show some really cool building renderings. Since it's late in the day, pretty pictures certainly can help, and then show really kind of the layout of the floor plans and how the buildings will kind of interface with the cottage clusters and the residents. And then Devin is going to round it out to talk about some of the key takeaways for the project, some of the lessons learned, both good and bad, to take away. And really the idea of this presentation is to frame the idea of cottage cluster housing using two projects that are really kind of at the opposite ends of both scale but also housing type, and really making clear that cottage cluster housing as part of middle housing can have a variety of applications, anything from an infill, 1 or 2 unit duplex on a site-constrained lot, all the way to a 200 unit large lot, unconventionally or conventionally financed, whether through a tax credit or any other financing model, but really showing the variety and the flexibility based on the site, the needs for the financing, and really showing how this can be applied in kind of the two greatest extremes, to kind of have that grounded in two specific projects. So with that, I'll just start with some definitions. What is cottage cluster housing? It's really a middle housing type that clusters either a group of homes or a single home around a shared common green space. So really thinking about how the homes can integrate with each other rather than thinking of homes in a linear street orientation. It's kind of taking that idea and clustering them around shared open space, shared common space, and really kind of thinking about both the homes themselves, but also how they create a community within the different clusters. What is missing middle housing? It can be really and or income and scale. So it can be thinking about really the middle point in income between a traditional market rate development and a low income subsidized, traditionally through the LIHTC program, subsidized development. So really targeting that missing middle in income. And it can also think about targeting the missing middle in the building typology. So rather than a single family home or a traditional apartment, really kind of that in between. So it's really taking the idea of income and or scale, that missing part, and targeting either or. Just some background on cottage cluster legislation and middle housing legislation. House Bill 2001 was really kind of the landmark housing bill, both in Oregon but in the United States. That was passed in 2019 and has really kind of created a sea change both in Oregon but also through the country of rethinking how we use our spaces and really creating opportunities for a variety of different housing types rather than just a traditional single-family home or an apartment. And this was really kind of the sea change in rethinking cities back to when we used to build cities before 100 years ago, when we had kind of the traditional Euclidean zoning of separation between single-family and multifamily. What HB 2001 does is legalize middle housing, applies based on city size, and really kind of set clear and objective standards and deadlines for cities to allow middle housing. We've had some subsequent refining legislation based on what we've learned, both good and bad, with House Bill 2001 in the past legislative session. There's been some refinements on allowing housing that can be either attached or detached on each lot, and also looking at adopting model codes as far as what best practices in the industry has started to adopt and learn that cities can then take. So really taking what was a relatively radical idea with House Bill 2001 and starting to refine that in order for cities and communities to be more successful in implementing middle housing. The House Bill 2001 definition of a cottage cluster is a grouping of at least 4 dwelling units on a single lot or parcel, and having each home relatively small scale size of less than 900 square feet. And again, really kind of situating these homes around a common courtyard or open space. So rather than just a linear street orientation, having a clustering within a courtyard. And then really kind of having a minimum density of 4 units per acre as part of the definition that we'll talk about how Oregon City adopted the House Bill 2001 requirements that really help facilitate the Housing Authority being able to adapt those standards for a large-scale master development. And so with that, I'll pass it to Jessie.
Thank you. Hi. So I know we all know this, but I feel like it's useful to ground some of our conversations around the need. And Oregon needs 500,000 new homes by 2045. And roughly 30% of those are targeted to serve middle-income households in that 60 to 120% AMI range that Andrew described. Shortstack is a development platform, and it's a housing product, and it's really designed to meet that missing middle. And we deliver that through a collaborative development platform. We've worked through a really efficient design and construction basis of design. We utilize mass timber panels in a really specific way that I'll talk about. And Shortstack was really developed out of a response to the middle housing legislation and the changing middle housing zones, including cottage clusters. And we work to combine both public financing and private impact equity to deliver. The development platform is a collaboration between myself, my firm is Homework Development, and my partner, Anna McKay. Her firm is Sister City. And the 2 Shortstack housing products are a 3 to 4 story stacked multifamily rental product and starter homes that are for sale. And I'm going to be talking about the starter homes today. This is actually the first presentation I'm using that term. We're trying to rebrand cottage cluster because the cottage term is a little funky for what we're delivering. So would love some feedback on starter homes. We have 2 of these for sale development sites, Shortstack Milwaukie, which I'll talk in more detail on, and Shortstack Hillside. And when we're looking for development sites for the Shortstack model, especially for a for sale product, we're really looking specifically for well-connected urban infill neighborhoods that are walking or biking distance to schools, jobs, grocery stores, parks, and public transit. And the Ardenwald neighborhood in the city of Milwaukee really fits the bill for those goals. It's connected through bike trails and light rail to Portland and Milwaukee City Center, and the cottage cluster zoning works fantastically on the lot sizes in this neighborhood. The starter home price that we're targeting, and these are all in development costs for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-story detached home. The starter home price that we're targeting for the Shortstack model is it's about $450,000 a home to build. And on the right of that, you see in the dark teal, the subsidy required to hit those various middle income affordability levels. Shortstack Milwaukie is 15 homes. We're almost through construction. We should be finished early next month. And this is in collaboration with the Proud Ground Community Land Trust. And these homes will be sold to qualified buyers earning up to 80% AMI, but we're really targeting the first round of buyers closer to 60% AMI with a target sales price of $260,000 per home. And we're supported generously through our funding partners, including OHCS and the Housing Authority of Clackamas County, Metro, and the City of Milwaukee. And these homes are, I think, a great application of the cottage cluster zone. And they also are a good example of some of the pros and cons of this type of density. Because what we're trying to do is find a sweet spot between efficiency and kind of the sameness and replicability that you see in like a larger scale subdivision. And with 15 homes on one lot, we're trying to find some differentiation with color and landscaping, but repeating the same home design, in this case, all the 2-bedroom homes, in order to really bring that purchase price down and make the homes as affordable as possible. And our North Star when we were making design decisions here was as many homes as possible and with a sales price as low as possible. And so some of the trade-offs are that we don't have off-street parking, for instance, and that's just one of the trade-offs that we see when we're really focused on building more units. So here's the site plan. This is a 24,000 square foot lot. It's kind of a long, deep lot, which is pretty common to this neighborhood. And we're hitting about 27 units per acre with the density here. And there used to be one home on this lot. And I failed to give some neighborhood context in my slides, but this site is surrounded by single-family home lots that are roughly half acre in size. And I forgot to mention that the architecture firm, the design is by Works Architecture, and these are being constructed by Owen Gabbert LLC, really important project partners. So kind of a long preamble to get to the meat of what we're talking about today, which is cottage cluster zoning. But I think we circled through a few different versions of this, and the city of Milwaukee was super helpful and supportive and helped us really optimize what was unfolding in real time as we were working on the site planning a couple years ago as they were developing their code. And so they helped us devise this. It's actually 2 clusters, one larger courtyard in the middle and kind of a smaller courtyard. And then we were able to get kind of a drop-off zone and fire access through the fire lane on the bottom of the site. And here are some of the unit plans. As I mentioned, it's just under 1,000 square feet. And we have 2-bed, 2 bathrooms here. And you can see we're really focused on the detached model rather than an attached, because we love to have extra daylight and a really kind of livable, marketable plan that works for a variety of household types. Critical to the Shortstack vision here is also studying how we can find design and cost and construction efficiencies. And the use of mass timber, we think, is a really important tool in this research. It didn't pencil out at this scale to build all 15 homes utilizing mass timber, cross-laminated timber panels, but through a grant from the U.S. Forest Service Wood Innovation Grant Program, we were able to do one home with cross-laminated timber walls and roof and floor panels, which you can see here. The panels flew in one day. It went up really fast, and we're really excited to be able to show some information at the end of this project as a differentiator, not just what is the cost difference, what is the time difference to build, but what is the marketability difference? Like, is this the first home to sell? Or are buyers that not really that interested in a wood home? So we're gonna have some interesting feedback coming out of that. And then just briefly, our latest cottage cluster site is part of the Hillside Master Plan redevelopment that is led by Related Northwest and part of the Housing Authority of Clackamas County repositioning that Gloria is going to be talking about. But you can see here, we kind of took what we learned from the other Milwaukie site, and we're able to fit 20 homes on this lot, and we are building some off-street parking here because the width of the site really lent itself to that. And in this case, we are prototyping a 3-bedroom unit in addition to the 2-bedroom unit. And again, I think it's just a great example of how that medium density or neighborhood scale density can be, I think, a really comfortable result from the cottage cluster zoning, where it just fits pretty well within a residential neighborhood and doesn't feel like it's completely out of place.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gloria. I'm with the Housing Authority. So let's start out with why we're redeveloping Clackamas Heights. So little known fact, the Housing Authority of Clackamas County is the oldest public housing authority in Oregon. Clackamas Heights and Hillside Park, which Jesse talked about, were our 2 first developments built in the 1940s. They were built as defense housing for workers during the World War II as a part of the New Deal. And today, they are 2 of the oldest public housing properties in the nation. Because of that, these units don't have foundations, they have little insulation, they have no cooling, and they have inefficient heating. Also, because of the funding that we use for public housing, we struggle to adequately maintain and operate our public housing because they're entirely dependent on declining federal funding appropriations. So that leads us to why we are repositioning out of public housing. We've decided to reposition out of all of our public housing in Clackamas County. This allows us to enhance existing housing, build more affordable housing, and strengthen our long-term sustainability as a housing authority. Existing public housing residents, our current residents, will receive tenant protection or Section 8 vouchers. They'll receive relocation assistance. That includes any fees for their new homes, any initial deposits, and even transportation to and from to view the new unit that they'll be in. And then also a right to return. So as these properties are redeveloped and brand spanking new, they'll be first on the list to return. So this plan will increase housing in Oregon City. It'll also increase the number of allocated vouchers in the county, and it'll allow us to house more people. And as mentioned previously, HAC is also redeveloping Hillside Park, which is a 100-unit public housing development. It'll be a 500-unit master plan redevelopment in Milwaukie. Okay, and then, so how does Oregon City define a cottage cluster? So we kind of talked about the initial legislation and how that legislation defines a cottage cluster, and Oregon City is a little bit different. It's very similar, but cottage clusters can be groups of 4 to 12 smaller dwelling units clustered together around a common green space. They can be individual detached structures or attached structures such as townhouses, duplexes, 3 to 4plexes. They must be clustered around a central courtyard rather than arranged in a traditional grid. And each cottage has a maximum 900 square foot footprint and 1,500 square foot floor area. Clusters should average around 1,000 square feet, and at least half of the cottages need to abut the open space. And the open space should be designed as one compact area with landscaping and amenities with no more than 75% of it being paved. This bonus slide. Oh, I broke it. I'll just be very descriptive with my notes. I can kind of start without it. So multifamily, so what made us choose cottage clusters instead of like typical multifamily apartments? And this was initially explored in 2012. They went through a master planning process and initially looked into having higher density housing in this area. In 2012, the funding fell through, and there was also some community pushback because of the type of housing that they're pursuing. Just to set a little bit of context, this is in Oregon City. It's a very residential neighborhood, and there's limited access to amenities, limited access to transportation. And so when this project was pursued again in 2021, HAC met with Oregon City, and the City of Oregon City suggested exploring cottage clusters. So we looked at, both options and came up with kind of pros and cons of each. So typical multifamily apartments, some cons are they would require an extensive master plan process. It would require traffic impact analysis, higher permitting fees, larger setbacks, there's less community support because it wouldn't necessarily fit in as well with the neighborhood. But a pro is there would be a higher density that we'd be able to achieve. When we looked at cottage clusters, the pros were it's a type 2 land use process and a type 1 application process for units. That's helpful. Better fit for surrounding density, more community support, better maintains the community feel. But the cons are there's a higher cost per unit and there's less density that's achievable. Ultimately, we felt that the pros outweighed the cons, and we pursued cottage cluster housing for the site. So the next slide, when we get there, is our community engagement. So that was a big part of this process for us was engaging the community, including residents, neighbors. We were awarded a 2040 Metro Planning Grant. And that funding helped us to form a resident advisory committee. It was made up of 15 residents who were provided a $100 stipend for each meeting to provide feedback on the design. For our initial community engagement, this funding helped us to interview community organizations. We had 3 of those resident advisory committee meetings, 3 resident surveys, a public open house, and then a neighborhood association presentation. It was a success. We felt like it got our residents really engaged and excited, and the neighbors are really engaged. So we continued it after the funding ran out, and we added 3 more resident advisory meetings. We sent out another survey, we hosted another public open house, and then presented at 2 additional neighborhood association meetings. The feedback that we got from the resident advisory committee directly influenced the design with the creation of the walking path. It reinforced our cottage cluster layout. It drove the design of the community garden, play areas, and sports court. And just as some additional background, the Clackamas Heights has a very active community garden. It's continued to grow over the years, and it's a really well-loved amenity. So we wanted to make sure to be able to replicate that in our new development. So we had 2 separate design meetings just on the community garden alone so that we can help to meet future needs. It also enhanced accessible design on the site. Residents felt very strongly about in-unit laundry in every unit. We heard that in every meeting, and so we were able to reconfigure the unit layouts to accommodate in-unit laundry in every unit. We tried to make the engagement as inclusive as possible as well. So we translated documents, reached out in a variety of ways, including texts, emails, flyers, newsletters, online and printed surveys, and included updates on our website. We also provided translation and sign language interpretation at meetings. We selected Bora in part because they were so jazzed about the cottage cluster layout, and they were really enthusiastic about, aligning with resident priorities and our vision of the community. And if you need me to delay a little bit more, Brian, I can, because I think his part is harder to talk about and just imagine. But that's all I have, and I'll hand it off to Brian to talk about design more.
Sure. Anybody have a good joke? We could acknowledge our partners in the room. J.H. Bronner's sitting up here and has been the Housing Authority's development representative, development consultant, owner's rep. I don't even know.
Everything.
They've been absolutely amazing and critical to the success of realizing this. We also have Trubeck Construction sitting in the back. We had cost studies between almost every single design meeting. And Trubeck was a continuous wellspring of information and collaboration as a partner in helping us to kind of vet, realize, and bring transparent design solutions to the owner so that we could talk about, here's what we heard, here's what we think the impacts would be, is it worth further study? So it was just a really iterative, collaborative relationship. And independent of people on this project, because we're still stalling, I see Jen Knapp sitting in the back, who is with Community Vision and has been super formative to Bora's work in inclusive and universal design. And while not directly a part of this project, is super influential on the way that I think I approach every project. So for those of you that are doing development and haven't yet met Community Vision, you should go talk to Jen. Now I'm out of stalling tactics. Yeah, we can take an intermission. Talk amongst yourselves. What's that? Any questions in the meantime? Yeah.
You're selling these buildings to people, correct? Are you forward thinking about management of the common spaces?
So the question was about management of the common spaces after home sales. So Shortstack is home ownership. Clackamas Heights, Park Place is rental. So I will let you take that.
Yeah, so one of the other, I think, decisions to make with cottage cluster development, if they are for sale, is whether to do a condo or a middle housing land division. And because the, at least City of Milwaukie, fantastic to work with, love the permitting process, love the planning process, but their permanent SDC fees haven't really scaled for cottage cluster yet. So it's really expensive to do the lot division there, and you're paying for utility connection fees and full SDC and permits for each home versus to this site. So we made the decision to build it as a condo development. The homeowners do own their own structure. So there is an HOA, but it's super minimal what the HOA is responsible for. It's really just the build back of the utilities and the landscape.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So, one of the experiences when you're building on these small lots, sometimes you come into code restrictions on where's the front door. Does it have to face the street? How do you navigate that?
Well, for the Shortstack layout, which you can maybe still visualize, and then Brian can talk about the Clackamas Heights layout, the front door it's flexible to face the street or the interior courtyard. And many of the kind of base level cottage cluster zoning requirements want at least 4 units kind of around the courtyard. But we also like the units facing the street, so we laid it out for both. But there is also a back door that goes to a private patio space. But for the street-facing units, that back door patio face is more integrated into the courtyard versus the courtyard-facing units, their back patio space is more private. So it's kind of fungible.
Yeah. Oh, we've got pictures. Guy, just real quick to your question. We had, similar approaches. There's a lot of confusion about what's a front door and what's a back door as you start to take cottages and rotate them around. And so there were a lot of kind of different permutations that came up, especially on a bigger site that we ran into. I'm going to jump the shark a little bit with just kind of one of the challenges we did run into as we've been now talking to other property owners and developers about how this model might translate is that the state middle housing code is being interpreted differently by most legislations, most authorities around the jurisdictions, end of the day, around the state. And so some will allow attached units, some won't allow attached units. Some have you pivot to a quadplex if you want to attach units, and that comes with a different set of rules. And so the interpretation at the jurisdictional, I should have talked to it when I had it up on the screen. There we go. The jurisdictional interpretations have been different. And so there is a bit of a warning in trying to translate these models that it does take some work. So picture what you just saw. All right, can I click through? All right, let's. I'm gonna do this real fast before it glitches out again. Oh, wait, except the clicker's not working. I'm really glad you're all here for this.
On that, the remote is on the other laptop.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, okay. Which one do you need up?
The first. Can we go back to the cluster diagrams? Brilliant. One more. There we go. All right.
Take a picture on your phones.
Just in case, just in case. All right, on the left, you can see the single cluster, right? That became our building block. And our site is just over 20 acres, right? So the conversation was, how do we repeat this building block in a way that we're realizing cost efficiencies and still thinking about variety and creating social infrastructure and positive outdoor space across the site. So we took that individual cluster, which in Oregon City is allowed to be up to 12 units. Those can be attached in up to 4 units at a time, up to quadplexes. So you can see we have 3 quadplexes basically making each 12-unit cluster. We started to group those together in ways that their individual courtyards opened up to a larger central green space when we think about the scale of a block, right? That's kind of that middle image there. And then beyond that, when we start to think about a site with multiple blocks, how do we start to stitch those together and differentiate block to block with different types of social amenities and other types of pedestrian infrastructure and open space there? Next slide, please. Does it work now? Great, okay. On the left, you can see the aerial of what we have right now. We have these lovely horseshoe Garden City style streets that all turn their back on each other. And in some ways, it feels like that would open up some pedestrian space in between, but what it really results in is kind of a tragedy of the commons. We've got some really big, beautiful old trees and a lot of undefined green space where the dogs do their thing. And that's what the residents told us over and over, is they don't really know how to use it, or the kids don't really want to play out there because of the dogs. And so in thinking through this, we had the opportunity to extend the street grids, connect back to the rest of the infrastructure of the neighborhood, streamline pathways to the adjacent bus stop. We worked through 3 different site plan options, all pretty different, but using cottage clusters, and discussed those pretty intensively with our resident advisory group through a couple of different community meetings. And lo and behold, ended up with a 4th option that looked like, little like the 3 that we gave them. It was kind of a hybrid of them. But what maybe there we go, what you can see is the streets themselves are now orthogonal because they're connecting to the surroundings, but we have a pedestrian path and loop that is completely independent of that street infrastructure and crosses all the streets at the mid-block with tabled intersections to really set up a pedestrian network that's a little over 1/3 of a mile long, is open to the neighbors to come and use, has community gardens, and a community building, several different playgrounds of different types and sizes, activity stations for adults, really just trying to leverage the fact that these units are already all facing into their private courtyards, but then how do we connect all of those courtyards in and of themselves to create a larger landscape? Across the middle of the site is really the heart of that infrastructure, with our community gardens and our largest kind of open lawn space, meadow, sports court, the largest playground on site right next to the community building itself. One thing to note, I guess, is this parking lot is one of our few off-street parking spaces. Because we were already building streets, we had the opportunity to put roughly a 1-to-1 parking ratio on street and avoid having to pave more of our beautiful site and kind of leverage that for more open space instead. Our community building was a unique challenge with the cottage cluster zoning code. So this has a kids' play area, small classroom, resident services and property management offices. We also have, just a large community room and kitchen kind of gathering space in here. But some of the unique math involved was that this building had to be created as an accessory to one of our cottage clusters. The way that the code is written, you have a maximum footprint allowance as well as a maximum per unit allowance. And so we had to kind of back into how big we could make this community building by creating one of our clusters as the smallest possible footprint so that we could borrow footprint basically for this. So we created a cluster of all one-bedroom units so that we could have this space. We were hopeful that we'd be able to borrow from multiple clusters, but because of the interpretation of the code, that just wasn't the case. So again, there's some nuance to the interpretations as you're stepping into similar parallel projects. Working across a site of this size, clearly we want to balance cost efficiency with enough variety to make it feel like an organic neighborhood, right? And so there were some challenges in that we have 1 through 4 bedroom units. Are non-accessible and accessible versions of each of those. We have 8 unit types across the site, which resulted in, I think we landed on 8 different quadplexes, 8 different fourplexes in the end. And to add a little variety, some of those rotate from east-west to north-south in different locations across the site, and we changed the roof pitch and orientation to benefit solar exposure and kind of shading on those windows as a strategy towards creating a little more variety on the site without creating more unit types or more building types from that. Beyond that, we leaned into color. We've got a palette of, I think we landed on 5 different colors, and we kind of tested, is 3 colors enough? Is 4 colors enough? Is 5 enough? We wanted to use kind of a monochromatic palette across each of the quadplexes, but then we wanted to mix those in so that you still felt like you had some variety between those roof pitches and the color palette that we were using. The quadplex plans themselves, the fourplexes, are pretty straightforward. They're mostly 1 and 2 bedroom units. Those are flats, you can see on the left side there. And then our 3 and our 4 bedroom units, other than the accessible ones, are all townhouse units. Those are 2-story units. We had pretty extensive conversations with our residents about which side of this building is the active side, which side is the quiet side, what does front door even mean in this context? From a resident dignity standpoint, all of these residents have their own front door and back door, right? So the differentiation to kind of a lot of other product types we're seeing in affordable housing, even in market rate housing, I think is pretty significant in what this offers the residents. And I think that we heard a lot of support from it day one in those community meetings because of it. Where we landed was that residents really wanted their more active spaces, their living room, dining room, kitchen, to be off of the courtyard, where we have a covered porch and some outdoor storage for each unit. And then we have a smaller, kind of more formal entry alcove front door off of what is typically the street-facing side. Sometimes that rotates to be between courtyards as well. But that quieter side has the bedrooms off of it. Is kind of the direction we heard. So all of these units, from an efficiency standpoint, we took our 1 bedroom, we added a bedroom next to it, and kind of scaled it to get our 2. Our 3s and our 4s are very similar. Our accessible units are also very similar. They just scale by a couple of feet to kind of get the turning clearances and things that we need in there. One other unique challenge, I guess, of the cottage cluster model was our 3 and our 4 bedroom accessible units exceed the maximum allowable footprint of a unit in a cottage cluster. Systemic barriers that weren't anticipated when somebody wrote the code. We were not able to get an exception to the code at this point. I think that's a deeper conversation that still needs to be had with the city and at the state level. So what we had to do is we actually had to parcel off one building of one of our cottage clusters. You wouldn't know looking at it, it feels the same, it looks the same, but we were allowed to call that building a triplex and put an accessible 3-bedroom unit, an accessible 4-bedroom unit, and I don't remember what the other unit is, a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom attached to it, and kind of work our way around the code to be able to get those accessible units in. One other study that we looked deeply into at the beginning of this project on the Housing Authority's kind of queue, and I think both our interest and Trubec's together, was whether it would be more cost effective to build this as a modular build, so full volumetric modular, or to stick build on site. And so we started the design process laying out the units for modular efficiency. We coordinated with a couple of different modular providers, learned about their systems. We ended up touring a couple of their factories as well. Knowing that it would be easier to go back to stick frame later than the inverse. And so by the time we hit about 50% schematic design, Trubeck took those initial drawings and vetted them and got pricing from a couple of different modular fabricators, brought them back, and we kind of, after some fine tuning around 25% design development, I think, we made the call. We ended up going stick frame in the end. It was close. The big challenge and delta that we ran into was that we have visibility requirements, basically accessible path requirements to every unit entry, as we would want anyways. But that was because of the OHCS funding that we were taking. And that meant that the modular units, which usually want to sit up on a concrete stem wall because you have a framed floor on them, would have to be somehow dropped down so they had a zero threshold entry off of the sidewalks, which led to some very expensive waterproofing detail because we all know we don't want to put wood below the ground. And the cost of that waterproofing detail across these 200 units was basically the delta between modular and stick frame. So in a lot of ways we were close, but there were some challenges, unfortunately. I believe that's the end of my portion. Go for it.
Okay, hi. I'm Devin Ellen. I'm the Housing Development Director with the Housing Authority, and I'm going to talk about project challenges. I think overall that the new cottage cluster legislation is proving to be an important tool, not only to create new middle housing opportunities, but also new affordable housing opportunities, especially in locations like Clackamas Heights, where dense multifamily housing might not make the most sense. That said, as you've heard, utilizing the cottage cluster model at Clackamas Heights was not without its trade-offs and challenges. However, only a couple of the challenges on this list are inherent to the cottage cluster development model. I think the biggest one in my mind is there's simply fewer economies of scale for cottage cluster development compared with a multifamily apartment building, right? So, no shared roof, shared walls, and systems, right? So these just translate into higher cost per unit for cottage clusters. There's also some challenges that could be addressed by tweaks to the cluster zoning or building codes, as Brian alluded to, allowing for larger accessible units, maybe some provisions for central community buildings. I think, creating some efficiencies to the building permitting process could spare the architect and building official the brain damage of, having to issue and review 200 separate building permits in this case. And then, some of the other project challenges on this list are inherent to other things, like the size of the site. It's 16 acres, right? With an extensive infrastructure scope that included replacing all the utilities, undergrounding the PG&E lines, building new streets, realigning the streets to the street grid, and just some of the hardscape and landscape inherent to a site this size. The type of project this is a public housing repositioning. And as part of this process, we had to relocate 99 households into new housing, and that's no small feat. So, big kudos to our relocation team. The funding sources in this project, we had 112 project-based vouchers, which triggers Davis-Bacon wage requirements, just adding to the construction costs. And then finally, the location of this project, Oregon City, okay? It's, not a jurisdiction that has incentives for affordable housing development and really high SDCs and permit fees. So that also is adding to the total development cost. But overall, I think that we feel these challenges were dwarfed by the opportunities that the cottage cluster code provided. So next, project successes. I think most prominent in my mind is the overall community buy-in that we received for the cottage cluster model. The scale of the development was really embraced by the residents and the neighbors and the surrounding community. And so this made the resident engagement process feel very productive and fulfilling. Residents were just excited about the vision for their new community. They liked that it preserved many of the things that they had in their public housing home, like front doors, back doors, lots of green space, and the ability to park by their unit. But they also liked that the new homes would include things that their previous home lacked, like foundations and insulation and heating and cooling, dishwashers, and in-unit laundry that we were able to provide. So, while we still had a type 2 process for the site infrastructure, the units themselves were an over-counter approval, so we didn't have to go through a master plan process, which we were talking about today, really decreased our development timeline, and we're a month away from closing, which is really exciting. And then, of course, the support of our public funders. We couldn't have done it without Metro and Clackamas County and OHCS, so thank you. And then finally, we have this amazing team that we've been working with that really worked together to find solutions and turn challenges into successes. So here's our project team, led by Hack Development, our resident services team, and our asset management team, Bora Architecture, Trubeck Construction, Bronner, couldn't have done it without them, Place, our landscape architect, our civil at Humber Design Group, our legal team at Foster Garvey, and then our property manager, Key Property Services. And let's see, if you want more information about the project, go check out our website. You'll find there a link to an incredibly well-done story map done by Gloria. It's amazing. She created a whole website with the history of the site, resident stories, a lot about the resident engagement process, and renderings of the site. So highly recommend you check it out. And with that, I'll pass it to Andrew.
All right, so I'll walk around, raise your hand if you have any questions.
I was wondering if we could revisit some of the challenges that were associated with going with the modular construction for the Clackamas Heights redevelopment. I guess I'm optimistic about modular construction and some of the ways that might help us. So I'm wondering if you could go back to that and maybe walk us through what some of the potential solutions might be, or, yeah. Okay. Do I give you this back? Okay.
Modularity works best in repetition, and works best when you're stacking it on top of itself, right? So when you can minimize your footprint and your foundations and maximize the height, that's kind of where you see it most often playing out. You also tend to see it more often playing out in markets with higher labor rates and higher land costs than we have. So the translation to Oregon is still challenging. I think that when you look at Washington and California and Colorado and other places, we're seeing it more and more often pencil and work. Our prevailing wage is a challenge when it comes to modularity. We are underbuilding sites currently that could go over 4 stories because of our prevailing wage requirements locally, right? And I know that's a controversial topic that we don't want to have to be talking about wages versus building housing, but here we are with limited resources, right? So if we could be building sites to their full capacity, I think we'd be seeing modularity work better, but when you add higher labor rates on top of that, it complicates the equation. So this project being wide and short meant we had a lot of foundation, and then on top of that we had accessibility aspirations and requirements that further complicated the detailing. I don't know if anybody else has more they want to add.
The 3-story or the 3-bedroom open from above issue of stacking.
You occasionally end up paying for volume that doesn't have floors in it. As we were trying to figure out how to do very efficient 3-bedroom townhouses within kind of some of the other rules and parameters we had set up with our other units. everything becomes interrelated when you're doing modularity, right? So you want one unit to be like the next, like the next. It worked out really well for our 4 bedrooms and our 1s and our 2s, and the 3s were a challenge. And so we ended up having kind of this void space where we couldn't add square footage, or we'd be going above OHCS standards, and we didn't necessarily need to or want to add that square footage, but you end up paying for kind of a volume that you can't use at times. Yeah, I know Joe in the back had a question. And then you can answer that. Oh, brilliant.
I had a question on the infrastructure costs for the rental site and the right-of-ways, so the new street grid. Is that public or private? And what was the decision metric around that decision, if there was one?
That's a great question. So we ultimately landed on private streets, so we could provide the street parking that we wanted, and be able to assign parking spaces to units. Because like being able, in the previous iteration, folks could park right outside their units, and that was something that was really important that we heard from the resident advisory group. But we went back and forth on it for a while. Were there other reasons that I'm not thinking of?
Was there a cost differential on the infrastructure between public and private?
No, we were still held to the same city standards, even as private streets.
Just a question about the tenants. So the former tenants that were moved, they were all renting, right? You redeveloped it, you're planning on selling each unit? No?
No, they'll be rentals still.
They will maintain rental status, all of them, or any? Ah, okay, sorry, my bad, misunderstood.
Thanks. Was there any study or possibility of phasing construction so that tenants could stay in place?
We did look at that, but it just ended up adding costs, and we decided ultimately that we would just relocate everyone and then provide the opportunity for them to move back if they wanted to. What we found overall is that residents are excited to get their project-based Section 8 voucher. There's a huge waiting list for those types of vouchers, and so that kind of weighed into the decision as well.
Are there any incentives, like, I guess, funding incentives to make that more a reality that you guys are aware of to keep tenants in place, I guess, alternatives to housing vouchers, just to kind of maintain communities?
I'm not aware of them, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Where are you putting it? Someone's over there.
I wasn't kidding about the walking shoes.
Thank you very much. I was a little interested in some of the decision-making that went into place, Jesse, as regarded, you said you did missing middle rentals and your other developments for the Shortstack, but when you did these 2 sites in Milwaukie, you went with the homeownership model. Can you talk about why you went that route and why it also influenced your decision to go with the Cottage cluster versus the Cottage cluster in other instances?
Good question. We believe that all housing types are required to meet the need, and in terms of like really hitting the equity, not just like social racial equity, but earning equity over time in your housing, it does feel like homeownership is a stronger path for that, and we just need more options for starter homes, and for folks who can't afford the, market rate homes and the mortgage or the down payment. And in terms of just the most stable housing option you can have is to own your own place. And that did kind of lead us to the cottage cluster model, because we weren't willing to build condos in the typical sense of like the stacked condos, just because of all the liability wrapped up in that. And it's, in our opinion, Anna and I, that isn't the most marketable. Like what we hear from folks in the community is that people want their own detached home. And there are, of course, a lot of other typologies that are marketable, but we're really focused on detached homes. And once you kind of lock that in as a typology, it really leads you to cottage cluster, because then it's like, how can we get more density where folks can still own the structure, their full home, even if the land is on a lease or in a condo model, they still own that home. Yeah, I think that answers it.
Without getting terribly into the weeds, can you talk about the, do you have an HOA for those for sale units? How do you maintain affordability if it's sold again down the road? Just, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we do have an HOA because we did build it as a condo rather than dividing the land, and I talked about kind of the costs and the SDC and the utility fees in that decision. The HOA responsibility is very minimal. It's just really the landscaping and the utility buyback, so their role isn't huge. The community can form their own kind of community rules and regulations as a group of homeowners as they want. Proud Ground, as the community land trust partner, is the steward of the affordability over time in perpetuity. So there are restrictions that go with the land, run with the deed to ensure that they are always sold to qualified buyers. And Proud Ground is the steward of that and will be involved in not just the initial sales to qualified homeowners, but all the subsequent sales as well. And they do a ton of homeowner education so that folks buying these units really understand what that community land trust means to them and what the kind of legalese in the deed really means from a practical standpoint.
There's still a chance to build equity with that?
Yes, they build equity. It is a limited equity model.
Cool, thank you.
Could you explain the limited equity a little bit more?
In a land trust model, the equity is capped, and I think it's 3%. Sorry, I should know that number off the top of my head. But so the homeowner is a qualified homeowner earning less than 80% area median income, and the initial sales are actually closer to 65% affordability, and that's to have as much kind of headroom as possible for subsequent purchasers. So depending on what the market does, there's always room for that homeowner to earn some equity in that home, no matter whether they sell it in 1 year or in 20 years, if that makes sense. So you don't want to sell them initially for the highest possible rate within the deed restricted affordability level, because there is a possibility for folks to earn equity over time. That being said, I am a huge proponent of finding other tools that aren't as limiting on homeowners. I talked about the idea of building wealth and building equity in your home. Of course, coming in at such a low, initial purchase price, $260,000 in this case, is just such a fantastic opportunity. But I think there are opportunities kind of along the spectrum of affordability, and maybe closer to the 100% or 120% affordability, perhaps with less restrictions on that back-end sale. Perhaps the deed restriction is only 10 years, and if you own it longer than 10 years, then there are no restrictions on your sale. Like, I'm really, really curious if we can find a sweet spot or a balance in between that deeper subsidy required for kind of perpetual affordability versus something that's maybe more reasonable, a smaller subsidy for a shorter restrictive period, just so that folks can wait it out and build more equity, even though that initial sales price may not be that low.
Hi, I'm sorry if I missed it, but I remember the total cost for those units was $450,000, but the cost for the buyers, you said, is $260,000. Who is paying the subsidy?
the subsidy comes from our generous public finance partners. So Oregon Housing and Community Services, Metro, Clackamas County, City of Milwaukee pooled a bunch of resources from these different funding agencies in order to write down that sales price. And that's kind of what I was just talking about is there a way to reduce the subsidy required and try to hit maybe 100% area median income or something like kind of more in between market rate and affordability. But our public resources are so limited and we really need to ensure that they're doing the maximum impact with long-term affordability, but that does require a much deeper subsidy level.
I have a couple of questions. First one to Anna. In terms of real estate taxes, is there any abatement or relief to your owners on that?
Not locally. The state has a land trust tax exemption, and I believe it reduces it by 1/3 of what it would be if it's a home owned under a land trust. So there's a bit of a discount. The City of Milwaukee doesn't currently have a program for a property tax exemption other than kind of a lower income. They don't have anything in the 60 to 80% AMI range.
Okay, and then the second is back to the Clackamas Heights project. I'm looking at this plan, which is amazing, but there's an awful lot of infrastructure there to maintain long term. And I'm just curious to how the Housing Association, HAC, is sort of working on that, or what the sort of structure is to make sure that's maintained and upkept.
We're building in very generous reserves. I mean, that's the answer.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah, totally. How do we do charades for sure?
Well, you would have been leaving.
Let me go find help in it.
Yeah, we handled that very well.
Well, thank you. I mean, it happened on the right.
It was actually a good time. It was
It was the best presentation I've been to. All of season is the most interesting to me because it's been really interesting and
Hi, I'm going to introduce myself. Thank you. I'm Melissa, sits across from Hart.
I know you.
Yeah, so we overlapped very briefly there. It's good to see you. And we're actually about to have a kickoff meeting for Bridge Meadows Milwaukie.
Oh, perfect.
So we're right next door to you guys.
Yes,
So
I hear
I don't know much about it yet. Just want to say hey.
Yeah, well, I saw Brian yesterday, and I think we're going to do a joint call as soon as you guys have a second time.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Love Bridge Meadows, glad they're going to be there.
Yeah, they're so awesome.
Yeah, well, it's good to meet you, or see you again.
I know.
Yeah. Congrats.
Yes, hopefully I get to stay involved.
I think I know most of it, but if you want to give me a how are you? Cottage homes.
No cottage.
Yeah, I get rid of cottage, but cedar, like downsizing. Bravo, ma'am. Thank you. Bravo. And by the way, technical difficulty, no one noticed. It made it, you guys did a great job. Everything I've been in says some kind of technical difficulty.
Yeah, but senior homeownership.
Just because if they're downsizing and, promoting a cottage because you're in a perfect community, not being isolated. They are. And then some or the AMI for success, but, after the fact.
the, this is all gonna be like, it's meant to be like a waterfall down of like different things for kids to play on. And then like throughout the site, there's like, these are all different play areas that are all like, one's for jumping, one's for sliding, one's for, you know, like, I think it'll be really cool. It'll be a really cool like walking, like not having to do any maintenance, but still having be part of the community, give up those big old houses that you can't maintain anyway, for people at the Shortstack. We didn't clarify. Okay, yeah, there was some clarification. I know, yeah, it would have been, yeah. They're separate, we're partnering. So the Shortstack project, the Milwaukie one, we provided them, we gave them a grant of $750,000 for Metro. And then their Hillside project that they talked about is on our Hillside Park place. So it's like a part, it's integrated in there. Like that was another tricky thing that we're like, how do we don't want to talk about it. Yeah, oh, okay. Yes. Thank you. Can you remind me of your name? I do know. Yes, you're in the mentorship thing. Is your hair different? Is your hair different? Oh, no. Oh, okay. 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 Yeah, I like it. Anyway, yeah, thanks for introducing yourself. Sorry I didn't recognize. Yeah, glad you're a part of the mentorship. Or, well, one in general. Hopefully we'll start doing more. Yeah, thank you. Have fun. Yeah.
Conference essential. Yeah, I love it.
It was perfect timing for it to happen. My slides didn't happen. I don't know if it's my fault. I just want to say hello. I'm just such a fan. Oh my God, thank you. Jesse. Yeah. I did information with you. Oh, I'm exhausted. I feel like my your name. I know. Desi. Desi. You had darker hair. Yes, I did. It looks beautiful. Tomorrow, but that was like done well. It's hard. So I'm just like inside. It's like, did I say, oh, I'm really about my yeah. But there's people like me who think like want to see excited to hear all stuff that you don't know. I know, I feel like I've been slacking on that. But yeah. You'll let me know. Working on new apps right now. Yeah. And I heard from I had talked to Ellie yesterday, obviously for from JP and for from yeah. So I'm really excited.
I literally just showed you, and you still try it. Stop, no, don't touch it. No, you're gonna crush your
Yeah, a good chef. Oh, yeah. Great photos. Yeah. I love that you guys have like, and she was telling us, it was like, yeah, can we continue to do this? Like complex. Yeah. Did you agree? Yeah, I feel it does seem like it's been kind of growing in like usage or security, and it's really good for that area. It sounds like that you have very kind of security. I know, but also like it's been pretty good. Yeah, I think there's like some of the sides, you know, it's a new program they're getting around, but yeah, I would recommend it. Yeah, there's a lot of it. Yeah, it's pretty experience about how security. Yeah. That's great. Thanks for participating. Yeah.
The longboard. I longboard, so yeah. And your kiddo is. I'm trying to like show my son that. Like, I use my I tried to step on the skateboard and oh, we have actually went
Consolation prize was a coffee.
Well, not everything. Whoever's over there. Yeah, so it was like. Is that you? Like, main goal of the whole project was to bring utility bills to sense. So, yes, you should. Building will still have.
All right, sir.
Utility bills.
Thank you.
And the more people, but everything.
Where's my phone?
about this project?
Yeah, so, JT is talking about your great project in just a crown source. So this is JT works for Save It. And JT is you're the cultural livability specialist. I can see you too. Did you used to be livability? Yeah. Okay, your cultural events, okay. I got another role title to remember for you. Your ground source, the geothermal, yeah. Okay. And how awesome.
It's attached.
Yeah, there's a bunch of holes with pipes in there that collect the heat.
I have a very bad knowledge of how you think all of this.
I would like to see his drawing, but I was
No,
hoping.
it's my drawing.
Oh, it's your drawing, okay.
I'll show it to you if you want to see it.
Okay, I'll try to. I'd love to see actually either, yeah. But you guys should be very proud of what you committed to, so.
Yeah, okay, bye. Good job.
Oh, really?
Too, by the way, just like flowing slide deck.
She's getting the word out?
Yeah, I thought it was good.
No, it wasn't even there.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and now it's, we're being.
Okay, see you tomorrow.
Okay. In the.
Can I stay by you, Brian? I'm sorry.
Yes.